The night sky above eastern Ukraine was restless. Dull flashes lit the horizon every few minutes, accompanied by distant rumbles that shook the very earth beneath the soldiers' boots. For months, both sides had fought over the same scarred fields, trenches stretching like veins across the land. Yet tonight, something was different. Tonight, a silence before the storm hung heavy in the air. Russian troops sat in their dugouts, believing they had control, believing the front line was stable. They were wrong. Ukraine had been quietly preparing for weeks, refining a strategy so sharp, so unexpected, that even Western analysts couldn't predict its full scale. It began not with artillery, not with tanks, but with silence. Ukrainian units pulled back in the dead of night, leaving certain forward trenches abandoned, almost inviting Russia to advance. Moscow's commanders saw what they thought was weakness and opportunity to push deeper, but it was no retreat. It was a trap. By dawn, Russian columns began advancing cautiously, their armored vehicles moving into areas that seemed undefended. They laughed over radios, declaring small victories. But then, the silence cracked open, hidden in tree lines and underground bunkers. Ukrainian drones rose into the sky, hundreds of them. And like anything the Russians had faced before, these weren't just ordinary FPV kamikaze drones. They were upgraded, redesigned, carrying heavier warheads, moving faster, flying lower, evading electronic warfare systems. It was Ukraine's new wave of drone warfare, born out of months of innovation. One by one, Russian armored vehicles erupted into fireballs. Convoys were cut apart before they could even react. Panic set in. Soldiers scrambled for cover, only to find that cover no longer existed. Every trench, every building, every tree line could be a launch point for another drone. And then came the artillery. Ukraine had been mapping Russian positions for weeks using advanced surveillance, powered by Western satellites and local intelligence. Once the drones crippled mobility, long-range precision strikes rained down, ammunition depots exploded, command centers vanished in flames. Russian supply trucks, hidden miles behind the front, were obliterated before they could reach their soldiers. This wasn't just an attack, it was systematic dismantling. The heart of Russia's front line began to collapse. Commanders shouted over broken radios, desperately trying to regroup their scattered forces. But the truth was undeniable. Ukraine had upgraded its entire battlefield strategy. It was no longer about defending inch by inch, it was about overwhelming Russia's ability to fight at all. In the nearby villages, civilians watched in awe. For so long they had lived under the shadow of fear, hearing artillery, seeing tanks roll past their homes. Now, for the first time, they saw Russian armor burning in the fields. Hope began to replace despair. Mothers whispered to their children,
"Hold on, this war might finally turn." But behind this brilliance was sacrifice. Ukrainian soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing each move carried risks. The upgraded strategy required coordination, patience, and bravery. Every drone operator knew he might be hunted. Every artillery crew risked being tracked. Yet they pressed forward, because they understood, this was more than a battle. This was survival. As evening fell, the battlefield was transformed. Russian forces that once felt unstoppable were retreating, leaving behind destroyed vehicles, abandoned weapons, and shattered morale. Moscow's propaganda machine scrambled to explain the disaster, but even loyal voices couldn't hide the truth. For the first time, Russian soldiers began whispering among themselves, "Maybe we can't win this war." And in Kyiv, as reports poured in, commanders smiled grimly. The first phase of the strategy upgrade was complete. But it was only the beginning. The world hadn't yet seen what Ukraine was truly capable of. The smoke still hung heavy over the horizon as the second day began. Russia believed the chaos of the first assault was temporary, that Ukraine's new tactic was a lucky strike, a single coordinated ambush. But they were wrong again. Ukraine hadn't simply launched an attack. They had rewritten the rules of war. At dawn, while Russian units scrambled to dig new defensive lines, Ukraine unleashed Phase 2. Long-range strike systems, armed with precision Western munitions, began targeting infrastructure miles behind enemy lines. Bridges that carried Russian supplies crumbled into rivers. Railway hubs that had kept Moscow's war machine running erupted into fireballs. Russian commanders tried to adapt, ordering convoys to reroute, to move at night, to spread thin across backroads. But Ukraine anticipated every move. Swarms of drones hunted convoys even in the dark, guided by infrared cameras. Trucks carrying ammunition burst into flames one after another, leaving soldiers stranded without food, fuel, or bullets. This was no longer a battle over territory. It was a war of exhaustion, and Russia was being bled dry. Inside a ruined village near the front, Ukrainian infantry held their ground. Their radios buzzed with live drone feeds, giving them eyes over dozens of kilometers. For the first time, foot soldiers weren't blind, they knew exactly where Russian movements were coming from. When Russian squads tried to regroup for a counterattack, Ukrainian troops were already waiting, positioning themselves with near-surgical precision. "Hold steady, wait for the mark," whispered a commander into his headset. Seconds later, a Russian column emerged. Before they could fire a shot, artillery shells slammed into their position. Survivors fled, only to be cut down by drones circling above like hawks. It wasn't just warfare, it was orchestration, a deadly symphony where every note hit its mark. Panic spread fast. Russian morale, already fragile, collapsed further. Soldiers abandoned equipment, leaving tanks intact simply because they had no fuel to run them. Others surrendered in groups, raising their hands, exhausted, hungry, defeated. For Ukrainian soldiers, victory came with mixed feelings. Many had lost brothers in earlier stages of the war. They fought with rage but also with sorrow. Some whispered the names of fallen comrades before launching another drone. Others stared silently at the horizon, knowing each step forward was built on sacrifice. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Kremlin faced a storm. Advisors clashed over explanations. Was it NATO's direct hand? Was it betrayal within their own ranks? State television tried to spin the narrative, calling it a temporary setback, but images of burning convoys and abandoned trenches flooded social media. Even loyal voices struggled to maintain the illusion. Western capitals, watching closely, realized the magnitude of what had happened. Ukraine's upgraded strategy wasn't just a battlefield trick, it was a transformation that exposed Russia's weaknesses to the entire world. Military analysts said what many already felt: Russia may not recover from this. And then came the final blow. In a stunning overnight operation, Ukrainian special forces crossed deep into Russian-controlled territory. Using a mix of sabotage, drones, and precise strikes, they destroyed a massive supply hub, a lifeline feeding tens of thousands of Russian troops. Ammunition stores detonated like thunder, shaking the ground for miles. Fuel depots burned so bright they turned night into day. Without supplies, the Russian frontline disintegrated. Soldiers who had once advanced confidently now begged for evacuation. Commanders, unable to communicate, abandoned posts. The chain of command fractured. By the end of the week, entire sections of Russia's 16-kilometer-long defensive front simply ceased to exist. Trenches lay empty. Artillery guns stood silent. For the first time since the war began, Ukraine didn't just hold its ground, it took back territory with speed unseen before. And yet, the victory wasn't only on the battlefield. In the hearts of Ukrainians, something changed forever. Families who had endured bombings,